Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a very cool person that I work a lot with. Her name is Brittany, or I call her Brit Heller. So welcome to the podcast, Brit Heller.
Thanks, Sean. Glad to be here.
And Brit works for Heatspring. What's your job at Heatspring, Brit?
Yeah, so my role is the director of program management, and that means I do a lot of random different things. So I work with our instructors and help make sure they have everything they need. I work a lot in our marketing and communications. So I have a lot of blog posts that I write. I make videos about getting certifications. I run our social media. And occasionally I'll work on content and curriculum myself, but I haven't done that too much lately.
Yeah, and what you're doing is great. And I really love the videos that you've been making lately. Like you have some YouTube videos and stuff like that. So that is super cool. You seem like you're better than Mr. Beast at it, or at least you're staying in less trouble than he has been lately.
I need Mr. Beast editing skills. I'm learning it as I go, but his stuff is pretty wild.
I'm sure he has a team of 100. So that's all we have to do is get you a team of 100 people. He probably doesn't even know how to turn on the editing software, I would imagine.
I don't know.
He's just a content creator and he's got other people that do that. And I have editors too, as you know. And so some more things about Brit is she is really smart. She has her PVIP, that's PV Installation Professional certification from NABCEP. And that was always the most difficult one that you could possibly get until they just came up with this ESIP, the ESIP certification. So are you going to take that one?
No plans to. I haven't really installed a ton of energy storage. PV all day, energy storage a little bit less.
What about all night? Doesn't PV work at the night? I've been reading some articles and it says that like there's this new kind of solar that works at night. You ever seen those articles?
I haven't. Are they the same people who are telling you about the free solar right now? Just put in your phone number and address.
Yeah, and how it's like so good to drive semi trucks on it with solar roadways and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, I have seen the solar roadways, but not in person. That is a thing, right, Sean?
I don't think it's a thing that it's like ever going to be cost effective, but there are some people that made some roads out of solar, but I just don't imagine us driving semi trucks over it. I mean, it's hard enough with regular roads to keep those things in one place, you know?
True.
Those roads, you drive over them, they just get all over the road. So when did you get your PVIP? That's the PV Installation Professional?
Back in 2017.
2017. And then you got the PVTS, that's PV Technical Sales. And when was that?
That would have been in 2016.
In 2016. And I was looking on your LinkedIn page and it looked like you were doing some solar sales in the beginning or when you first started doing it.
Yeah, my very first job was knocking on doors in New Orleans.
Wow, you're a New Orleans door knocker. That's pretty cool.
That's my roots.
Yeah. So what was that like? That's kind of cool. That's how you got into the industry. And I know that door knocking is kind of controversial. And it seems to me that there are a ton of door knockers. And then the people that are doing the NABCEP stuff are kind of not very connected to the door knockers. Like they don't go to our conferences as much, I think. I think they have their own SolarCon conference. Did you go to SolarCon?
I did not. And I will say my door knocking experience was all rooted in the goal of lead generation. So I wasn't trying to go and get folks to sign a deal right there, not even having thought of solar before I showed up at their doorstep. I was more walking around, checking roof for, any obstructions, making sure the roof quality looked good. And when I talked to the homeowner, if they owned the home or the person who lived there, if they owned the home, roof looked good, I would let them know about state incentives that were really popping off in Louisiana at that time. And if all those boxes checked, I would just get their info and then we'd follow up with them and we could kind of set them up for that next phase in the sales process. So definitely a little bit different than the door knockers who are knocking on a door and really pushing for a signed contract, like for somebody who wasn't expecting it. I do kind of have different feelings about that process.
So you never stuck your foot in the door when they opened it? You just like get some big strong boots, steel toes?
Yeah. Was not wearing my steel toes for all that walk-in, but oh yeah, I definitely had all sorts of interesting encounters. I think anytime you're knocking on somebody's door who's not expecting you, they're not expecting you. So, anything could be happening.
Yeah, and it's like over there in New Orleans, the party city. There, you probably ran into some drunk people, I guess, opening the door.
Hmm.
What did you do when they were just like, "Come on in and have some rum"? Did you take them up on it?
I don't know that that specifically happened, but I did have a lot of people like super friendly, super nice, and kind of genuinely excited to hear about the incentives that were going on then. Because at that time, like it was like a really good deal to go solar in Louisiana. It was basically a $10,000 state tax credit along with the 30% federal tax credit. So folks were getting systems that would typically run 20 grand for like 4 grand.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And so I suppose there's like good door knockers and bad door knockers. Which kind were you?
Well, I definitely wouldn't come on your podcast and then tell everyone I was a bad door knocker. But I truthfully don't think I was a bad one either. There's certainly people who didn't want to talk to me, and I totally respected that. I certainly was not trying to push super hard to talk to anybody who wasn't interested. And to be honest, I don't have the thick skin for that sort of thing, anyways. But yeah, I think on the whole, a lot of people were really excited to hear about it because, again, it was just like such a positive like option to go solar. It was just a really good deal with the incentives at that time. That was like almost 10 years ago in Louisiana. So things have changed drastically since then. But then once people started to listen a little bit more about it and then maybe out their phones and look it up themselves and see that it was real, people were pretty excited.
That's pretty cool. And you were doing the site survey and all that kind of stuff, checking out the roof. And I guess you probably were working with other people that were doing it too. And how did that work? Or like some of the people you were working with, I guess, were probably like better than others.
Yeah, like anything, I think there's folks who are, excelling at it and some folks who are like, okay. But luckily, I didn't have to do door knocking for too long. I think they had me in that role for like 2 weeks or so.
Huh.
And they were like, well, maybe we'll bump you up to like the next role. So I got to go into inside sales for about 2 months.
Was it scary, like your first door, just like walking up? And did you
Oh,
do your
yeah.
first one all by yourself?
No, no, I think I went with a crew of folks. But I think more scary was my first outside sales call. I remember being so nervous, and my knowledge at that time was still super basic, and I didn't really feel confident to withstand many lines of questioning. And so I'll never forget when I was doing my first sales call, and I actually went with somebody, Taylor Jackson, who teaches a psychology of solar sales class on our platform, which is a killer class. But he went with me on my first sales call
Uh
and he taught me about power poses. So we stood
huh.
outside the front door and we're doing what he called the Wonder Woman.
Uh
And so
huh.
we stood with our hands on our hips and like really tall spine, looking really proud, chin up to help you feel more confident.
Uh huh.
So it kind of worked. I don't think I got that sale, but it
Okay.
was a good first time.
That's pretty cool. Well, that's nice that you had help from such a knowledgeable person that is inspired by Wonder Woman, who's one of my favorite superheroes. So that's pretty cool. And then around that time, you just kind of moved up really quick. I mean, you were only doing that for 2 weeks. And then I guess, did you get the NABCEP associate first? Or you went right on to the technical sales?
Yeah, I went straight into technical sales and I ended up getting the PD associate after the fact when I was actually working as an Americorps Solar Corps fellow at Grid Alternatives because we had a grant that funded all of us studying and preparing and getting the PD associate. So I did get that, but it was after the PVTS.
You know what? I did a class and it was full of grid alternatives, Americorps, solar core people, and they were the coolest people ever. Some of them are still my friends. Hey, Callie, if you're out there. And so it was great. It was just super awesome. And then after I taught that class, it was in a yurt at the Solar Living Institute, rest in peace, up in Mendocino County, that's kind of further up in Northern California, really cool place, kind of hippie up there by Ukiah. And I said after that class, I guess it was in 2014, and after that class, I was like, when I retire, I'm going to be like AmeriCorps, Solar Corps volunteer for Grid Alternatives. I'm not sure too much exactly what that is, but it just was a lot of fun. And maybe you
Mm-hmm.
could explain a little bit. Do they still have that? And what is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm a little unsure of like how many positions they have, but Grid Alternatives has their Solar Core Fellowship program, and many of those positions are funded through AmeriCorps, but not all of them.
So what's AmeriCorps? It's like they give money, and I know you get like wages and stuff, but it's not a whole lot.
Yeah, it's a federal program that funds typically earlier stage career folks or sometimes career changers with different nonprofits across the country. And they provide them a stipend in exchange for working with them. And in addition to like a living stipend for when I worked there, it was like approximately like a $15 an hour stipend through Americorps. But also at the end of your term, which was an 11-month term, plus there was like an additional couple months funded by Grid, you also got an education award. So that's a federally funded award that can be used to pay student loans or to go to different school programs. So really it's like doing a year of service, though. It's oftentimes called a year of service.
So it's sort of like doing the Peace Corps in your own country, something like that?
Yeah, that's like a good
Huh?
way to think of it. I might be botching a lot of the details of how it's
Hmm.
funded and what exactly it's typically, used for. But yes, I think that's a great way to think about it. It's like an American Peace Corps, Americorps.
And a lot less likely to get malaria. And so Americorps is the federal program, and then Solar Corps, is that just like Americorps when somebody has a solar job, is what they call it?
That's what Grid calls theirs. And when I say Grid, I mean Grid Alternatives. They're a solar nonprofit based out of California, and I worked at their Colorado office. I haven't heard Solar Core in any other context yet, but there is like the newly funded Climate Corps, and I think that is going to have probably a lot more clean energy jobs. So I'm not sure if Solar Core will be used as other programs, but it's certainly a Grid Alternatives program.
So what was it like going through that program? Like you would live somewhere, I guess. Did they set you up with a place to live, or did you find your own place with the stipend that would cover it? Or how did that work? And then what did you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, yeah. So I found my own place. I was already living in Denver at the time. I had originally moved there for a job with Solar City that I left pretty quickly on, and then moved on to Grid Alternatives. And yeah, I already had a place to live. So that stipend was just, essentially like my wages. So it went towards all my just general living expenses. But yeah, when I worked in that role, Grid Alternatives Colorado had a big demonstration project to do all these different solar projects, community solar, particularly for dedicated to low income households or nonprofits all across the state of Colorado, just in partnership with all the different rural electric co-ops. And so I was traveling across the state working on community solar gardens all the way from Norwood, which is kind of close to Telluride, up to Fort Collins, to Steamboat Springs. It was awesome, but it was also very exhausting and very, very challenging for somebody who was new to construction.
So you were doing projects for grid alternatives and community solar gardens. What is that defined as?
Yeah, so community solar gardens are super cool because it gives people an opportunity to use solar energy and participate in this clean energy transition, even if they're renters or they have a house that maybe the roof isn't ideal for solar. And it's interesting because every state doesn't have community solar gardens. And in fact, a lot of states don't have them at all. And it's really rooted in policy. And so Colorado at that time, and this was like 2017, had a lot of new legislation around community solar gardens. And so it's, pretty much like a big field of solar modules. Sometimes they're tracker systems where it tracks the sun, and then other times they're fixed tilt. And essentially, every person who subscribes to this solar array gets a portion of the energy. And so, oftentimes, it would be like a bill reduction for folks. And for the projects we were doing, there was no cost for folks to subscribe. And basically, they just saw a reduction in their bill, which came from the solar energy produced from our solar arrays. So, it really helped reduce the energy burden for a lot of people who were paying a proportionately larger amount of their income towards their energy.
Great. So I recently had somebody on the show here that was doing community solar. And so you
Cool.
just call it a garden, I guess. Maybe that's a Colorado thing. Is that a community solar farm or something?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's like literally a Colorado thing. Like that's what they would call it there. And maybe Minnesota. I don't know. I'm pretty
Hmm.
fuzzy on all the policy at this point, but
Hmm.
there's certainly places that do call it solar gardens, but it's the same thing as a solar farm.
Okay, yeah. And then also, I was on a call this morning. There's a company in New Jersey that's doing community solar. And then part of the deal is they have to provide education to people that are trying to find jobs, like workforce development. And so I've been doing some work for them too. And I'm going out to South Jersey, maybe like in a month and a half, something like that.
That's awesome. So they're
Yeah.
doing, you're training installers or just anybody within the solar industry?
Yeah, it's pretty much anybody that wants to get trained or wants to get in the solar industry. So it's probably mostly not people that are already in the industry or have any experience. It's just people that want to get into solar, looking for a job. And I do have a link to that class. It is on my website, solarshawn.com. But that's for New Jersey residents, so it doesn't apply to most people. But no, that's totally cool. So Americorps, that's like the US government. They get some money, and then Grid Alternatives, they're a nonprofit, and they spend the money on these solar gardens, which is community solar projects, where if somebody doesn't have solar on their house and they can't put it on their house a lot of times because they're living in an apartment or they don't own it or they want to move soon or they live under a tree, then they can become part of a community solar project. And then the solar is not on their roof and they still get credit for it. And they can still go, yeah, I have solar, but it's not on my roof. And they can explain about community solar. And it's really cool. They used to have something too, or they probably still do, called virtual net metering, where somebody could put a project up somewhere else and then get credit for it. So it could be sort of like that. And of course, it's renewable energy and it's less expensive. So why else would anybody do it? I mean, probably you and I would do something that has to do with solar, even if it was more expensive, just because it's cool. And then we like being cool.
We do like being cool.
Yeah, and saving the planet, all that kind of stuff. And then I noticed too, like on your LinkedIn, that back in your earlier days, you were doing tutoring zone. You worked in education back in the day, probably before you were even doing solar, knocking on doors or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in college, I helped do marketing for a local like college UGA tutoring company that helped folks pass all their hard business classes, basically.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, that really fits into what you're doing because you're doing solar and you're doing education,
Yeah.
and that is your main job. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Shawn White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Shawn White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Shawn White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to solarshawn, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his Heatspring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. And another thing that I noticed that was kind of interesting that you had in your profile is you were an owner of a hostel in Chile.
Yeah.
So you must have been pretty young too. It looks like kind of earlier in your career. And you just go like, I'm going to get a hostel in Chile.
Yeah, more or less. Right out of college, I had this job as a traveling tire saleswoman, and it was not super aligned with who I am. And so, anyways, I saved up, money. And after about a year and a half or so of that job, I put in my notice and I moved to Colombia. And I took my sales bonus and I was able to save a lot of money. And I was like, I'm going to open a hostel in South America somewhere. And so I lived in South America for about 3 years. And I moved to Chile for a program with the Chilean government called Startup Chile. So I was living there with a different business that I was working on. And then kind of all the stars aligned for a hostel. So like 2 years in, I finally was able to open the hostel. And so I did it in Santiago. But
Wow.
yeah, it was
And you just did
short-lived.
that all by yourself?
Well, I had three business partners who were
Oh,
Chilenos. So
okay.
I did have partners and we did do it all together. So it was us four.
Is it still there?
I don't know if they survived COVID. After about 6 months or so, I actually ended up getting out of the hostel. It was just,
It was a hostile environment? Ah, ha, ha. That's one of my dad jokes that I would put on Heatspring classes.
yes, that is a classic, Sean.
And it wouldn't get me in trouble, too. Yeah. One of those jokes that doesn't get you in trouble.
Yeah, G-rated. That's good. Dad all the way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just decided to leave and moved to Colombia for a little bit longer and then when I moved back to the United States was when I got into the solar industry. So that was kind of like at the tail end of the hostel.
Cool. And so you went from community solar gardens to now you have some sort of farm. So you're using photosynthesis also besides the photovoltaic effect. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Photosynthesis on the farm.
Maybe you could tell us something about Sun Bottle Farms. And I've seen you posting things about that too.
Yeah, so we bought this property and we're about 30 minutes west of Atlanta. It's a 17 acres land out here. We're developing it into a regenerative farm. And so that just means the farm pretty much, every step of the process, we're trying to work in alignment with nature. So doing things like building the soil, really treating all of our animals ethically, really working on not just getting a yield from the land, but really working with the land so that the land is thriving and we're thriving and everything's better from our work here. So yeah, so just working on a lot of infrastructure projects. It's definitely slow because, I work at Heatspring and my husband is a director of O&M at an energy storage company. So that keeps him busy, but we work on our orchard. We've got a lot of vegetables growing here. We're shifting into medicinal herbs. So doing a lot of that, have about 80 animals who live here.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So what are their names? No.
The animals?
So like what kind do you have? I think I know that you have pigs or something like that.
Yeah, I do. I have 3 pet pigs. So, an assortment of different breeds of dairy goats, a lot of turkeys, chickens, and I think that's mostly it. Most of them are chickens and turkeys.
And I guess you like eat their eggs and all that kind of stuff. And I probably won't even ask you if you eat them because some people might not like that. So,
We don't raise any of them typically for meat, but sometimes you have too many roosters and they just can't live peacefully here. So,
yeah. One of the things that I notice a lot of times is I'm on phone calls and I hear roosters in the background. Not with you, I haven't noticed it with you, but when people in the Philippines and things like that,
mhm.
and it's just like cock-a-doodle-doo.
Yeah, they're always doing that over here, but luckily I'm far enough away you won't hear them.
Uh-huh, great. Where I live right now, we have a place for chickens, but we just don't have any chickens in it. The house came with it.
Oh,
So
nice. That's cool. Are you gonna get chickens?
we were actually looking where to get them just like a week ago, but they
Hmm.
said it's the wrong time of the year to buy them or
Yeah, you kind of want to get them. Typically, people like hatch chicks in the spring, and then as it gets warmer, because they're really sensitive to the cold. So it can be kind of hard if you've got little bitty babies and it's starting to get cold.
yeah, I would just like one that will make me an egg tomorrow.
Yeah, you got to just get some grown hens. You could probably find them in like your local next door or local like chicken
Okay.
group on Facebook.
I'll look for that. So I'm wondering too, like since you're doing farming and you're doing solar and it all comes from solar energy. I mean, pretty much everything, all of our energy comes from solar energy one way or another, even fossil fuels. But we're getting more recent solar energy, not solar energy from millions of years ago. And what kind of things do you think might be in common? Like I was thinking about like when I grew some plants, like decades ago, and I didn't think of where the sun was in the sky. Like I didn't think like,
Mm.
oh, the sun rises here and sets there at this season and that season and all that kind of stuff. I guess that probably helps you, huh? Like,
Oh yeah. I definitely know like when the sun rises where I live. I know where the sun sets where I live. I mean, the equinox was just the other day, so that makes it easy to know it's like around 7:30
mhm.
here for both. But yeah, I totally really really am aligned when the sun's coming up, when it's setting, what's the moon cycle right now. All of those things really affect growing, but then also, yeah, with the sun and solar energy, it's just something you kind of think about a lot like which way south. I'm sure most solar
Hmm.
people do know at any given time which way that is.
Yeah, and then how like at summer solstice versus winter solstice, the sun is 47 degrees higher. So
Wow.
something that you wouldn't think of being a problem as far as shading goes, if you want to have some kind of crop that needs sunlight in winter, you'd have to take that into consideration or, all your different seasons and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and same thing with just solar arrays, all those things that weren't shading the array in the summertime, or all of a sudden that chimney is doing damage on that array in terms of shading. So easy to think about it. in both ways.
Yeah, you can go out there, be all nerdy with your solar pathfinder or your soul metric seni and walking around your garden going like, okay, we're going to plant this right here, right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Could do it.
And you have your own property, right? So how many acres is it?
It's a little over 17.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, a lot of canvas to work with in terms of building stuff and growing stuff.
Maybe you could also add a hostel to it.
I think I'm good on the transient housing of young partiers.
So that kind of got tiring after a while.
Yeah, I'd say like regenerative farming is like the opposite, like something like a hostel is like when people are coming and going. And to be honest, the interactions tend to be very surface level, like really, really not super deep engagement in the communities that are around for people who are passing through. And like regenerative farming is the exact opposite. It's like putting down really deep roots and making plans that are like multi-year, like you don't see the fruit from the seeds you plant and a lot of times for a really long time. And so it's like quite the opposite, I think, philosophically.
I know also that you've sort of been involved in getting more women into solar. And I had
Yeah.
Riley on the podcast recently, and I'm sure you know her,
Mm-hmm.
solarforwomen.com. And what do you think you could tell people to get more women to do solar?
So much to say about this, but the industry is definitely lagging behind in terms of gender representation and all sorts of representation, I'd say probably, but we're talking about gender right this second. But yeah, I mean, especially as it relates to women in the trades, there's just got to be really welcoming environments for women to not only, get started in roles, but want to stay in them. And having really solid training. When I first started in construction, I actually got a job at a really big Colorado solar company that was willing to hire me, but I didn't see a single woman when I was at the warehouse or on my working interview. And I was just so new to construction, like I was really fumbling through that experience in the beginning that I didn't want to be like the only woman on the team while I'm also like having this really humbling learning experience. So I think just having really solid training programs and opportunities for women to get their footing, and not even only women, it's like people new to construction as well. That for me was really important. Like Grid Alternatives did a really great job at being this like training organization that was super focused on that and making an inclusive
Mm-hmm.
environment. So that was really important to me. And I imagine it'd be important to other women, especially if they're newer to construction or the trades. But I think that sort of training on the front end really does pay dividends like over the long haul. Because if you get women trained up and they feel really comfortable in their role, like I stayed at Grid for almost 5 years and I went into a different role after that construction fellowship. But, I feel like helping people get comfortable, like then they can just only grow from there. So that's one of the main things I think, at least when it comes to the trades.
Yeah, I think Grid Alternatives does a great job at that. In fact, I was just trying to think, I think I know more women at Grid Alternatives than men. And maybe they have even a better ratio like that. One of the things that I have noticed at just the classes that I teach is there's been a lot of classes where just like only men or
Mm-hmm.
and there's I think it's getting better. I actually had something that happened in Washington D.C. when I was teaching a NEC class based on solar at the ACES conference this
Mm-hmm.
summer, and just randomly the whole class was all women, so that was kind of cool. So yeah.
That doesn't happen often. So cool.
Yeah, like wasn't a class that was geared, supposed to be only for women or anything like that. It just like
Mm-hmm.
that's who showed up for the class. And so times are
Nice.
changing. And I think too that like there's some jobs that are just kind of like stereotypical for one gender or the other. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of against that. I think that we should just do whatever we want to do and break all those stereotypes, you know.
Yeah,
Mm.
doing construction was like the most life-changing thing for me ever. I always wanted to have those skills to where I had the ability to fix stuff and to create things. And having that foundation that I got when I was Americorps, Solar Corps at Grid, I'm able to use all of that on my farm and in my life and just make so much cool stuff. That's because I have construction skills. I think anybody who owns their own home, if they're able to like work on building their own construction skills, it will only help you to like know how to do some basic stuff.
Cool. And so another thing too, that you got your brother into the solar industry, right? So there's a
I
couple of
did.
Hellers, and so that's pretty cool. I guess there's some other sibling teams in the industry.
I heard that there was other ones.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
probably have a whole group of them that you have secret meetings with to take over the industry.
Yeah, Solar Sibs.
Uh-huh. So like there's
They're
Johan and
undercover.
Jennifer Alfson,
Mm-hmm.
and can you think of other ones right now or?
That's the main ones I know of. I know
Mhm.
my brother posted like a RE Plus Atlanta picture, and then some people said that they had some other Solar Sibs, but I didn't know them personally. So they're out there, but I don't know too many of them.
Well, that's pretty cool. Okay, and so another thing we can talk about are some of these different conferences. And I know that Heatspring likes to get super involved in the NABCEP conference. That's the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners Conference. And what we do too is when Brit and I work together is we promote classes that help people get NABCEP certified. And the big NABCEP conference is usually right around my birthday, March 29th. Send me presents, gold coins, things like that. And a couple of times, Mike, it has been during the conference. I think this last one that it wasn't. And the next
Mm,
one is going to be in Reno. So
yeah.
maybe you can talk a little bit about how Heatspring's involved in the NABCEP conference, besides giving away all the cool sweatshirts and stuff.
Yeah. I got mine on now. Yeah, the NABCEP conference is my annual getting to hang out with you, Sean. So that's fun. Also, Sean O'Brien and Sue and Jada and the team at NABCEP. It's like a big family reunion once you go once or twice. So the next conference is coming up in
March 24th to 27th. Yep.
nice.
They even have like a ticker that how many seconds.
Counting down the seconds till the
Uh,
conference. But it's awesome. And so, Sean, you always teach your PVA course live, which is wildly popular. Every year, I think, sell out of the capacity that we're given for your class. I think this next year we'll have a little bit bigger room. But yeah, Heatspring always loves to sponsor the PVA course with you. And, last year and this year, we also had another instructor teaching a session. So we had Wes Kennedy teaching a really awesome and hilarious energy storage class last year. I had never seen Wes teach live, and he was brilliant. And this year, we're looking at doing some an electrical safety course, but we're still working on those details. So TBD.
all right, cool. Yeah, yeah, I love teaching at that conference. And I did one that was even before I ever did it with Heatspring. It was in Niagara
Hmm,
Falls. And
nice.
I remember it was like freezing cold, and the water that was coming off the falls was like a snow machine. Like just from the mist, it would turn into snowflakes or something. It was kind of crazy. But yeah, I've been doing this PVA class at the NABCEP conferences, and it's a lot of fun. It's the people that are NABCEP certified mostly that show up at the conference. So there are just a lot of people that most of us have seen. They're kind of doing the same type of thing that we've been doing over and over
Mhm.
again. And I think it's growing too. There's like karaoke and stuff like that. And I usually participate in that. This last time I was doing something kind of silly. There's like ABC 1, 2, 3, Michael Jackson, you know that song, and they had an
Mhm.
80s theme, and I had like this Michael Jackson jacket, and then I was talking about how they changed 690.12 B2 ABC to B2 1, 2, 3, and I was freestyling. It was pretty cool. And there Nico Johnson was there. He interviewed me with my Michael Jackson jacket on. That was kind of cool. And yeah, and just seeing all the who's who of all the different people that are NABCEP certified and put the NABCEP thing together. And so it's a lot of people that are like into learning things too. So you go to one of these bigger conferences and they're great and everything, like, RE Plus not that long ago. And there's just a lot of other people there that are working in different aspects of the industry that call them solar panels instead of solar modules. and, a lot of salespeople and all that kind of stuff. And so the NABCEP conference is always pretty cool. So I will see you there. And I guess, I don't see you too much in person besides that conference. That's mostly pretty much when we hang out. I'm trying to think if I've ever even seen you in person any other place.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's been a NABCEP conference every year for the last couple of years. And same thing for other Heatspring staff, Brian Hayden, who started Heatspring. That's the only time I see him, my boss. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
virtual.
Yeah, everything's so virtual these days. And that's another great thing about the Heatspring courses. They are online and on demand, so you can take them at your own convenience. And unlike with real life, you can rewind them. You can hey, stop rewinding me. And so you can like really study something over and over again. And then when I'm teaching a class in person, like a lot of times they're long days and things like that. And there's only so much your brain can absorb. And with these classes, you can take a break when you need to, go like assimilate the information with something called a nap. I think it's just like the way to learn of the future. It's kind of fun. And then I can spend 8 hours making a 15-minute video. And that's probably how much time goes into a 15-minute video is 8 hours. So there's myself, and then there's editors and things like that. And I've started too putting other people into my classes. And so Bill Brooks has been in it for a long time. We got Johan Alfson in there in the PV Associate class. And I am working with Greg Smith now. And Greg Smith is another kind of famous guy that you'll see at the NABCEP conference. You'll see all of us there. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And I should get Brit Heller in my classes too. That would be cool.
Yeah, one day.
All right. One day I'm working on it. Well, thank you so much, Brit Heller, for being on the podcast. And how do people find you? I guess that we'll put it in the show notes and stuff, but you can look for Brit at LinkedIn. You can look for her at Heatspring. And any other ideas?
LinkedIn and Heatspring. My email is brit@heatspring.com. So if you ever have questions about certification or you're interested in teaching, feel free to reach out.
Good. I'm not afraid about giving out my email address either. SeanWhiteSolar@gmail.com. Some people are just so afraid of that. So yeah, email brit@heatspring.com, or you can get a hold of me. I actually even have my email address on my homepage of solarshawn.com. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To learn more, to sign up for some of these Heatspring classes, go to Solar, SEAN, that's solarshawn.com, and you can get links to all kinds of different places. Thanks, Britt.
Thanks, Sean.